Well, welcome back to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott here with Steph Moss.
Pastor Podcast.
Pastor Podcast.
Hi, guys. Nice to...
This is a special edition of our Pastor's Podcast we do each year, where we, on the podcast and via video, if you're watching on YouTube, do the walk through our budget presentation ahead of our budget approval coming up. Exciting stuff.
I actually enjoy it every year.
I know you do. I know you do.
And there's a few people in church who love this.
Yeah. There are.
If you didn't, or if you don't, hopefully we make it somewhat interesting and understandable.
Yeah. And as we dive in, the reason we do this is for full transparency, so that when we as a church family commit to a budget, we're doing so not simply kind of hoping that this is all being stewarded well, but knowing with confidence that our pastors, that our staff, that us as a church family are stewarding what God has entrusted to us well. And that kind of financial transparency is really, really important to us. It's why we give you a copy of our budget, every single line item, so that you can look at. And if you're listening or watching and you have any questions afterwards, we're available. I want to be able to answer those, want to walk with you. We want everybody to be able to not just approve this budget kind of in a formal sense, but we want the church membership to be able to commit to this budget together with confidence and excited about what God's going to do through it.
Yeah, well put.
So we're going to start out, as we do each year, with just looking at where we are financially. And so first we'll show you our financial balance sheet. So as we've been talking about throughout this year, and we'll talk about this more in a second, but our giving has been down from where we budgeted, down from what we brought in last year. And so that's kind of been the case in a lot of ways over the course of the entire year, but in the spring, we've made up a little bit of that. I'll show you the fullness of this in a minute, but the summary number is that we're estimating that we will be $100,000 under our budget for our general offerings this year. There's a whole host of different reasons for that. We can talk about it. There's a whole host of reasons that we don't fully understand, but we've had a ton of transition between the church plants, between people moving, between all sorts of different things going on. And while this is
inflation
and inflation, a ton of inflation, lots of different dynamics and things going on. And so while this is, in one sense, disappointing or a bummer, as we have to kind of compensate for that in our budget, it's also not totally out of the blue. And I think, but we also want to make sure that you, as our members, know where we're at and what we're asking for next year, because while we've endured that this year, the goal is that we would set a budget that we can meet next year. We would adjust our budget to set a budget that we can meet next year, and that we would all sacrificially give towards that as we go forward. If you look at our financial balance sheet, and we'll show it on the screen here, you can look. It's sent out in the email that you've received. Probably the most important thing is if you look down at the bottom at total available funds. While our giving's projected to be about $100,000 under budget, our staff and pastors have made a number of cuts already this year, a number of sacrifices. Both back in February, we froze a number of our expense accounts and a number of different things that we were spending money on. Our pastors froze their retirement contributions. So our pastors have not received retirement contributions since February, all like as a part of kind of trimming where we could for this current fiscal year. We'll talk about the plans for next fiscal year in a minute. But as a result of those sacrifices, instead of being $100,000 in the red at the end of this year, we're going to be about $50,000 in the red. So if you look at our total available funds, June 2022, so at the beginning of this fiscal year, we had about $329,000, about $330,000 in total available funds. As of today, we have $274,412 available funds. And that's basically our cash on hand for operations. And so that's gone down, but thankfully not because of the a number of the things we've put in place over the last few months, not as far down as it could have been. So you can look at our financial assets and our restricted funds. The restricted funds are funds that we are holding in cash, but are not available for our general operations because they were given for particular designated uses. The most significant of that, you will notice, is the legacy fund. And so for those of you that might not be familiar, and we'll explain this a little bit more later too, but the legacy fund is a fund that is where we collect any bequests that come in. So if somebody passes away and they leave money to the church, that money doesn't just go into our general operating budget. We've committed to use that money not for our general operating expenses, but to use half of that money for long-term, large facility projects here on campus so that we can entrust this facility to the next generation. And the other half of it is for multiplication and outreach purposes, whether that's church plants. The funding of our church plants has come out of our legacy fund. There's projects capital projects with some of our global partners that have come out of this legacy fund. You'll hear on a upcoming update about the new structure in Indonesia, the Humbles that came out of, actually, was that the legacy fund? Or was that the Christmas? That was the legacy fund.
Both.
It was.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Initially through the legacy
That's right.
fund, and then we did like an additional thing through.
And the classroom block at Africa Renewal University, a significant amount of that came from the legacy fund. So half of the legacy fund goes to external outreach-oriented purposes like church plants, capital projects. Half of it goes to our facility here, but none of the legacy fund is available for our regular operational use. And so that's why while we hold those investments and are utilizing them for those purposes, they are not included in our total available funds. The available funds are the things that we have available for operations here at the church. If you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know. Did I miss or come with anything there,
No.
Steph? Okay.
That's it.
So with that, we will transition then to our main budget document. And if you look at our budget document, we have a summary of the income we've brought in over the last few years. So in the fiscal year 2019 to 2020, we brought in $1.463 million. In 2020 to 2021, it was 1.45. Then in 2021 to 2022, we brought in 1.72, which was aided by a payroll protection grant that we got from the government. And so this coming year, we kind of budgeted for growth based on what we were doing there. And actually, if you look at the general offerings between what we brought in last year and what we budgeted for this year, we even budgeted a decrease, but also budgeted a large increase in facility use fees because of the facility use fees we brought in 2021 and 2022. Our budget for this current fiscal year, the one we are just wrapping up now, was $1.617 million. We are, if you look at what we are projected to bring in, as I mentioned before, our general offerings are projected to bring in $1.35 million, which is about $100,000 less than we budgeted. The thing is, that's not the only place where income this year has come up short of what we budgeted based on our last fiscal year. Facility use fees are also significantly lower than we had budgeted. There have been a few different changes in groups that have used our facility here. Some of that is the Wildwood School that uses our gym, using it less than they anticipated. Some of that is some of the other uses we had the year before not returning. Some of that is the rental of our parking lot that has now, that the construction company that was using our parking lot has found other alternatives. And so as a result, we've brought in $47,000, or projected to bring in $47,000 in facility use fees, not $105,000. And then on top of all of that, this year we budgeted and received our final payroll protection grant as a part of the government's COVID stimulus money. And we will not be receiving that next year as well. And so in one sense, this last year, we budgeted for growth, And the reality is that a lot of situations went in the opposite direction because of a lot of these different factors, because of the transitions, the church plant, the inflation, and all sorts of other things. And so we've had to figure out how we're going to make the appropriate adjustments to that. I feel like you had something to say.
No, I just knew you were coming to that. So well put. We had to figure out a way to make the appropriate adjustments, which...
So the appropriate adjustments, if you see, we are projected to bring in, where we are forecasting next year to bring in general offerings, what we are projected to bring in this year. So we're going to base our next year's budget on what we're projecting we bring in this year. And when you combine that with our decrease in facility use fees and the lack of payroll protection grant, the total budget for this coming fiscal year, our income budget is $1.4 million, which is $217,000 less than this year's budget. That is the reality is that is a not insignificant amount of money. And so what we're going to show you in the budget we're presenting here is the best way we've known to find ways to cut that budget while preserving as much of our church structure, both our staffing structure, our pastoral structure and care as possible. I think we're, in one sense, happy with how we've been able to do that. It's not fun. There's some painful cuts, but there seems to be a number of things that the Lord is doing in guiding and directing our church family. And so in that sense, we don't see this as a crisis or a reason to start manipulating for money or something like that. We're not going to change our principles because of a change like this, but we see that the Lord's doing a number of different things through it, and we're going to show you what that is. If the total that we've had to cut from the budget is $217,000, the reality is that about half of that we believe are cuts that we've been able to make that we hope will be sustainable. We've found some places to tighten things up or to go without certain things that we think we can do long term. The other half of that, just over $100,000, we see as temporary cuts. We're going to instill them for this year, but we're hoping to and think it's important to put them back into the budget in coming years. And so we'll talk about that as well.
I appreciate that you highlighted it's, as we've been through the whole process. So we've been for months now, and then with the staff and with the elders and with all the data. And so when you first hear kind of that giving is lower, $217,000, I appreciate that you highlighted that's not a crisis. I think there were critical things that required sacrifice, intention, really purposeful decisions. We had to do a lot of like that, Tetris and on the board and kind of figuring out where to make cuts and what makes sense and preserving culture and our values and our people. But I do appreciate, as a listener who hasn't been through it, it could probably feel like a crisis. And I haven't seen you guys respond in that way. I've seen everybody respond in faith and in trust, but with like a sense of this is important and we need to really be intentional and prayerful about how we go about it. So, yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that's not necessarily because it's not a big deal. And I don't mean to downplay the significance. I think it's been it's been an experience and I think there are some real sacrifices people are making to make it work. But there's also a sense of trust in what the Lord's doing, his goodness through it, and in even the ways that he's guiding and leading our church family through it. The reality is it's not like we had an extra $217,000 that we could just do without in the budget.
Right,
like we were already pretty lean.
Yes.
There were some places where we were able to find some things that we can do without. But the rest of this, well, you'll see it as we walk through. So there's a summary of our expenses and how they go in each large budget category: pastors, administration, facility, programs, and missional partnerships. And we're going to walk through each of those categories specifically. Also a couple of graphs. The first pie chart is a representation of how percentage-wise our budget breaks down into these different categories. and then a graph of just our historical budgets and general offerings, so you can kind of see with us the long-term changes in our church budget over the last decade or decade plus. So first of all, when we get to our pastors, all of our pastors we're obviously not instilling any pay raises for staff or pastors as we try to make this so all salaries are staying the same. The one significant change is that we are continuing to withhold pastoral retirement contributions, and so we do not plan to contribute to the pastor's personal retirement accounts as we have in the last number of years. Again, that's something that we do, I think, big picture wise. That's one of those things that we would view as a temporary freeze for this fiscal year in a hopes of bringing back eventually. I think that's something we see as important. It's important for our longevity. It's important for the longevity of the church that pastors don't feel like they have to keep on the payroll forever, but that they're able to prepare to retire. But this year, it's a sacrifice we can make in order to preserve our staffing structure and the individuals we have now. So that's the biggest note there. You'll see we haven't recaptured all of that though, because you'll also see that our health insurance has increased, as I'm sure all yours has as well. So that we're able to capture about half of that by it back into the budget. So secondly, is the area of administration. So let's start off with our administrative staff, and this is where probably the most significant shift is going on. Steph, I think, could use some explanation. So one of the shifts we are making is to shift. Steph is still going to be employed here at a church, but she's going to be doing essentially a different position, one that she's been doing in part, she's going to be doing in full. And so we've talked before about our heart for a community center, here on campus that partners with all sorts of different organizations in order to meet the needs of the marginalized and most vulnerable in our city. It's a huge vision that we have a huge heart for and have been working towards for the last handful of years. We've realized that that's not going to come to fruition unless we commit someone full-time to its development. This is a job we've been trying to hire Steph for a decade.
Yes. Fun fact.
And is really kind of in your wheelhouse, training-wise, gifting-wise. And so one of the things that we've decided to do is to fund the establishment of that community center through the Legacy Fund. Just like we've been planting churches, essentially view it as planting a community center and funding it for 2 to 3 years until it is financially self-sustaining. So that would take Steph's salary out of our church budget and become its own position funded by the Legacy Fund for this outreach purpose. And so in that sense, it would be taking this position off of our books here.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest chunk that we found. Right?
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really hard. Well, not really hard. It was impossible to get to the total number we needed without some significant staff coming off our budget. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that the Lord's been working, this is a really both creative and also fascinatingly, I think, exciting development that the Lord's been using this difficult situation to bring about a creative solution that I actually think is probably the best one for the community center in the long term,
right,
but might not have been one we would have made.
Right. Without a budget.
Well, yeah, without the crunch.
Yeah.
The
crunch.
The crunch.
Yeah, that's what I've appreciated about the process. I think it sometimes these hard things force us to see things differently that we wouldn't have. We would have, So God, He's creative. He knows what He's doing.
Yeah.
And so there's some changes there. But
no, we're on the podcast. No, we're walking to the budget, but like, this is personal. This is family too. Like, how are you feeling about that transition and the prospect of a new focus, more singularly focused in the community center realm?
It's interesting. In one aspect, it's just perfect. It's everything. I mean, since I was a kid, I remember making a project in high school, and I presented it and it was a community center, and I won this whole service project idea. And then I went into social work, and that's what I focused on in social work, is community development and planning and administration and policy. And I went into it saying, like, Jesus was my model and my motivation for being a social worker. And I just always felt very strongly that why isn't all churches, or why aren't churches like kind of living out the gospel? Not that churches aren't, but I just always had this passion for wanting to see churches kind of just be the local church in the lives of people in and around the church building. And I remember about 10 years ago when we talked about, maybe me coming on to do something like that here. And it wasn't the right timing. And then when I did come on staff, director of staff and operations, I didn't think I'm like, that's not what I'm good at. I'm good at community center stuff and global missions and local missions. And I don't know what you're thinking, Scott. And what's the hardest part, I think, is I've grown to love my role of facilitating staff and the operations, the internal operations of the church. And so partly that is hard to let go of. But that's what has been kind of a sweet blessing. I've grown so much as a person to realize that, wow, there are some strengths there, and I love my role, and the staff team have brought a lot of that out in me, and you've been an instrumental piece of that. And so I think I didn't feel ready, like, wow, I think I can just do both, Scott. I can do both. And this last year has proven both require some pretty you need attention, and you need kind of clarity, and the one lane is really good for me, I think. And so this is kind of an opportunity for me to transition that I don't know if I could have made that decision on my own, even if with some convincing, or I just think this is helping me really see, it forced me to realize, hey, thanks, I had this great season as director of staff and operations, but I also know this is like just something that is uniquely something I've always been passionate about. I was going to say something. Well, I lost it. But anyways, this whole process, I feel like it's the right move. It's hard, but I don't want people to not have confidence, because I'm excited about it, and I can't wait. And we'll see what God's going to do through it. So yeah.
I think we all feel that. I think both like the loss and the excitement, I think, are both a part of that. And I really, go ahead.
I know what I want to add. This process forced me to see that you guys were actually serious about that. You really felt that this was something God was wanting for our church and our community. A lot of people say, well, we have a building, so we must use it. And that wasn't ever. I watched you guys process this intention, this heart that you feel like God was putting it on your hearts to be a missional church in the community. And it wasn't just about, we have this building being underutilized. And so this process helped me see you sacrificed my role to ensure that comes to fruition. And I think that was probably my biggest takeaway from this, and the thing that I just love about the elders, the staff culture, and really living out the core values that we have written out, So yeah.
Well, I think that dovetails with the fact, I think some people might have the question like, okay, it's one thing for you to move, but what happens when that whole position disappears from the budget? And we are experimenting with how to absorb that. I think this is also not in one sense a long-term solution. I'm not sure we can do long-term without someone in that role. For those of you who are listening and asking that question, just the real brief thing is I'm absorbing some of that. We have our administrative assistant that helps out with elder facilitation and counseling. That's going to be a new person in that position, and we're going to hire for them to absorb some of that, some of the HR and things like that. There's some things that we're distributing to directors, and some things we're not going to be able to do for the time being.
And it will look different.
Yeah. And so we're going to continue to cross those bridges as we go, but we think we're set up in a way to take the next couple of steps and trust the Lord with that. You'll see that's the only other significant, the other significant kind of change in our administration staffing is instead of replacing for a graphic designer, we are going to be moving to using volunteer graphic designers within the church and not just having one person do all the projects, but asking different people to help out with different projects. And so if you have graphic design skills and would like to help us out, that is one way that we, again, it just made it possible for us to contract the budget in this way.
Yeah.
And a part of that is, I mean, it's public as well now, but Amy Carbo is also coming off staff. We need to replace her, but she's transitioning in life. She's transitioned churches to the South Bay and is transitioning kind of career direction. And so we're going to be replacing that with somebody in the fall with some of those added components as well. And she's been doing graphic design for us as well. So that's kind of all why all that comes together.
Yeah.
If you look through, the other thing that you will notice is that our administration staff, and you'll see this in our program staff as well, we are also freezing their staff retirement contributions. And so we will not be making contributions this fiscal year to our directors. We had retirement contributions for our directors, for our full-time staff. And that's another sacrifice that we're going to be asking them to make in order to, preserve our overall structure. And so that's it's a big ask for them too. In one sense, it's not money out of their pocket on a weekly basis, but it is a decrease in compensation. And I want to recognize that. It's a real sacrifice we're asking for them too.
And we don't get back all of it because all of our healthcare it increased by about 8% overall for healthcare for all the directors as well. So you don't see the full impact of that, budget.
But it helps us offset it. You'll see our elder and staff expenses. We've zeroed out most of those, trying to do more limited things in staff appreciation, more limited things in our elder retreats and books and materials. Some of that will also just be things that come out of staff and pastor pockets, but there are also some places that we could make some cuts. Our administrative expenses, you see there the changes we were able to make. We've frozen and zeroed out our new computer line item. Again, we have, if a computer fails, we'll have to figure something out. But we're trying to limit some of those expenses where we can. So donation service charges, we've decreased from $5,000 to $3,000. That's not because that has gone down this year. It's actually gone up. What that is, and you're going to hear me talk about this more at the family meeting. I just want to talk about it briefly here. I don't want to take up too much time, but that is credit card fees. That's when you're giving online. If you give through a bank transfer, there's no fee. But if you give using a credit card, we get charged almost 3%. And those fees have totaled $9,000 this year. That is a part-time staff member for us. And we are going to plead with you, please, go into Realm, PayPal, either set things up so that you can transfer out of your bank account and not, actually, I mean, I think by and large, not giving on a credit card is probably the better practice generally. If you need to, or if you want to do it for your points or whatever, if you will cover the transaction fee for us, that 3%, it would make a huge difference. And honestly, it's at $9,000 plus this last year. By doing that, you are helping us to keep our part-time staff employed and providing the things that we need to do. And again, we're looking to make some of these sacrifices throughout the budget. We want to take this on. This is one thing that we're going to ask you to take on as our members as well. So we'll talk about that more, but it's pretty important.
Definitely just want to add, I know you're talking about at the family meeting, but contact Sandy King if you need help setting that up, Sandy at cornerstonewla.org. And to put that in just like a really quick snippet, when you give, not all of your amount is going to us. It's like you give $100 and what 90 something goes to us.
97 goes to us.
Right. $3 goes to a credit card institution. So when you start to think about, wow, not all of my giving is actually going to my local church, I think that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. And so the ACH, and it has all the security features and all those things. You know, we can get you whatever you need to know to get your ACH set up. So help us.
And then the rest of the administration expenses, the communication expenses are essentially, they are what they are. We were able to decrease some of them significantly as we as much as we could.
Yeah,
comb through everything.
Tech soup. We moved things. We really tried to save everywhere we could.
And we've also frozen our ministry expenses for our pastors, and so that they will be providing for their own, meetings and things like that as we go. But I think that's another important way that we can be a part of finding the solutions here. So,
and just because people don't know this, but I'll speak up for you guys. Those expense accounts are for when you're meeting with people. And so these will now be out of your pocket. These are costs that when you meet with people and you need to, have coffee or lunch or something with them, it'll just, so it reduces technically your take home pay. But in case people are like, what's an expense account? It's not like,
it's not a frivolous thing. No, it's primarily, and specifically for ministry with people. But it's, not a prohibitor to doing that ministry. Yeah. It helps facilitate it, but it's not a prohibitor. And so that's why we're, looking for the ways there. Moving into the facility, with our facility staff salaries, we are, our director of facilities is decreasing, just the hours are decreasing. Actually, a number of systems have gotten simplified. And so it just requires some less hours.
That's another way to say that Becky rocks at her job and does it really well in shorter hours.
She's just an incredible rock star and was like, actually, I can do the same thing, and we got better systems now. And so, and systems that she's made happen and has brought a ton of efficiency for us. And so that's a huge, huge, huge blessing. Our custodian landscaper went up. Part of that's because we're actually asking Edwin, who's been our custodian, to take on the landscaping, the majority of the landscaping for the campus. There's a couple of factors to that. I mean, it's a huge campus. So you're like, well, how is one guy going to do all the landscaping? Well, number one, I think there's a lot of it that he can do. Number two, there's some of the big projects like our tree trimming and things like that we're still going to have our landscaper come in and do, like the tree trimming and the big things like that. And number three, there will probably be opportunities to make this work by asking us all to pitch in. And I think maybe 3 or 4 times a year, we're going to have just work mornings on a Saturday, 2 or 3 hours where a bunch of us just show up, where we all just show up and pick weeds and set Edwin up to succeed, so that he doesn't get overwhelmed by it all. And I think that's a simple way that we can save on our landscaping, which is expensive, and make it work as a family. Yeah. And so it's one of the changes we're looking to make. You see the staff benefits change just in relation to that. Our contract services, the main change there is the landscaping services changing from $28,000 down to $5,000. And that's because of that move. So come out, pick some weeds, and help us make that possible. The rest of that's all pretty self-explanatory. Liability insurance went up slightly because it does. Property tax slightly because it does. And again, that's property tax on only the mission house. We don't pay property tax on our entire campus. Praise the Lord. Mm-hmm. So in repair and maintenance, you'll see that our repair budget's going to stay the same. Our supplies and equipment, we've been able to kind of consolidate, get things efficient. And so that'll decrease slightly, but we have removed improvements out of the budget. And that's another big chunk that we decided, if there are any improvements this coming year, mainly funded by the Legacy Fund and the insurance money from the flood in the office, we are anticipating the admin building and the offices being restored through those means. And so we're going to kind of put all improvements in that bucket and say, there's a lot of other improvements we'd like to do, but we can't do this year because we need to save as much money as we can. And so it's a big place that we can kind of save a chunk. And so that's another thing that can't be long-term. I think if we do that year after year after year after year, there's going to be a lot of deferred needs that are going to, but that is something we can do this year. And so are looking to do that as we go.
I wonder if there's minor improvements that could also be work days, like, some paint projects.
See, now we're talking. Yeah. Exactly. We just need to get more creative, right?
Exactly.
Who's in? I see you all raising your hand in front of the YouTube screen. Yeah. Our utilities are pretty, gone up a little bit. Gas went up like everybody's gas went up. Water, power, sewer, power is pretty dialed in, which again, we save a ton because of our I mean,
Solar panels.
our solar panels, like our actual utility bill is probably about 4 times that. But because of our solar panels that we invested in just a handful of years ago, we're able to stay manageable with that, which is a huge blessing.
Yeah.
So that's that. I'm going more line by line than I have in previous years, I think.
It's one of those years.
But it's one of those years. And so I hope if you need to, you can put this on 1.5 speed. But I think that it's important given the changes we're making. And so thanks for sticking with us. Appreciate it. And our programs, our program directors, you'll see our directors, all their salaries increased just slightly. That's because of requirements in the city. Everything else has essentially stayed the same salary-wise from last year. Again, trying to maintain our staffing structure that is that makes our discipleship of one another in various places, in our Sunday mornings, in our community groups, in our intro classes, stuff like that possible. And also this staffing structure is what allows our pastors to do the pastoral work and not be overwhelmed with the administrative work, the program work, the logistics of Sunday mornings, the logistics of all the community groups and everything else. It keeps us freed to do pastoral, shepherding, studying, praying. And it's in that sense, the New Testament model. But that's why we think the structure is so important, because without it, it's not just like a pay cut or something to pastors. It means pulling pastors away from their primary responsibilities. Yeah. So our Sunday service expenses, you'll see here the program staff retirement contributions. That's why that's zeroed out. We talked about that before. Sunday service expenses, everything's essentially the same. We've decreased everything where we could. A number of our staff members were like, okay, we kind of need some more for our areas. And we decreased everything that we could, kind of trimmed every place that we felt like was even possibly reasonable to do. Our Sunday, if you look down to kids ministries, our Sunday childcare workers, that's decreased because we have filled, number one, so many great volunteers. Number two, have a less of a need for paid workers and less of even an availability of paid workers. And so that's paying for those that do serve both services every Sunday, or who serve every Sunday. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We want you to go to church.
Yeah, we want you to go to church. You don't serve both services every Sunday, but those who serve every single Sunday, we provide a stipend for them. And so that's what that is, but it's lower than we budgeted last year, which was allowed us to recapture some money as well. All church events, we've kept the Harvest Festival. Everything else we're kind of putting on pause for now. And
well, could I clarify? I think
sure. That pause isn't necessarily, yeah. Okay,
yeah, it doesn't mean
Please.
we're not having them. So I think it's more that we found ways to host these same events in different ways. So with the Nicole kind of instituted the bring your own lunch and let's just have a picnic after the Unity Sundays. And so a few times, I think mostly just coming out of the pandemic, and we were really excited to get back together. I think one year sponsored a In-N-Out truck or something. Yeah. That is very expensive for a church this size. And so now we bring our own lunch, and obviously there's no cost there, right? So there's ways that it doesn't mean we're not doing a Unity Sunday celebration or things like, or family meetings. Family meetings, if you come to them and you see on the tables, it's different families in the church providing their favorite snacks or foods, and Steph Durr instituted
Shout
that
out
idea.
to Steph Durr, make it happen. Absolutely.
So there's ways that we've just saved and said, okay, we're not going to host this from a budget perspective, but we're still going to have those things. But Harvest Festival, you can't really throw a Harvest Festival for the
like
community.
A potluck Harvest Festival. Would be, yeah.
Sounds like a public health nightmare.
So, yeah. So that's all of our programs. We've trimmed where we can. Honestly, it's hard to trim there because we're already really basic. Like, we're not a church that does a ton of big programs that we can just, trim from, or has a ton of excess staff that we can trim from. And so, trimmed what we can and got us a little bit there.
Yeah.
Into our final area of missional partnerships. You'll see the very first line item there is the Community Center Director, Partnership Coordinator. That was the portion of Steph's position that we had allocated to the Community Center. We said, we want you to do staff and operations for a portion of your job, and another portion of it will be focused on the Community Center. Again, Steph is going to be focusing wholly on the Community Center, but we're going to be funding that from the Legacy Fund as a outreach plant development, like our church plants and things like that. So that's why that's able to come off the budget. All of our key partners, we are keeping at a similar place. We have our developing partners at different levels, and based on their needs and what's going on, based on the specific needs that they have, those are partners that are continuing to develop in different ways and in different directions. Our legacy partners are essentially all about the same. There's a couple of small changes in there based on need and some other things, but everything's pretty similar there as well. We've just tried to kind of trim the couple places that we can. In our partner and relationship expenses, we've trimmed a couple of those categories. Those are really important to us because those are funds that we use to facilitate deep and meaningful relationships across long distances. Like it's not easy to have not just a financial relationship with our key partners across the globe, but to host them, to visit them, to invest in them, and to be able to help them when like emergency situations that they face come up.
Right.
And so we've decreased that. We tried to not take it all away, but we've decreased that slightly, and have also frozen all of our kind of church planting and multiplication. Those are different networks that we're a part of, things that has been conveyed to us that we can freeze for the time being until we're in a different position. And our local community ministry, some of those things have changed as well. Our benevolence ministry, we've cut that out, not because we don't care about benevolence,
right.
or we're not doing that anymore, but we actually have some leftover funds from the COVID relief fund that we're going to utilize. They were given essentially for that purpose, for benevolence during the pandemic. And so we're going to use that for the sake of benevolence this coming year. And then there's a few other partners that are in the midst of transitioning or have transitioned off the field through retirement and other things like that. And so when you total all that up, we were able to save $50,000 actually from that category, which again, some of that's temporary. Some of that we hope to bring back. Some of that we actually hope to continue to build and grow our partnerships. But it made it possible for us to find cuts without significantly cutting or really cutting any
right.
partners that are in need of the funds right now, and continuing to keep our commitments to them and to walk with them along the way, which is really important to us. And I'm kind of overwhelmed that we're both able to trim. The Lord kind of orchestrated that in some ways, and maintain those giving levels.
Yeah.
You
did it.
Any questions about any of that? Or anything to add on that relational side?
No, I think
in those partnerships.
No, I mean, I think I appreciate that you explain to people, we talk first and we kind of find out, even just how these impacts or cuts could impact people. And so sometimes some of these cuts came because the Lord was already transitioning people, or that people had less of a need this year. And so there's ways that he was graciously made it easier on us too. And so it's not always us saying, well, they don't really, deserve less this year or something. It's more about, where can cuts not make such a negative impact, but where can they just be, strategic. So, So if you scroll up actually back to the top of this, our budget summary, it's through all those different means that in total, and I still actually looking at it, I've gone through it 3 times in the last 24 hours. I still don't know how that all adds up to $217,000. The math is correct. I'm not saying I don't, but I feel like the Lord has been really gracious, both in helping us to identify places that we can temporarily cut and sacrifice, and finding some places, even like the transition of your position and things like that, and the landscaping and things like that, where there are some creative solutions that he's shown us and made us aware of. And it just reminds me of his incredible faithfulness. Yeah.
And it also isn't nothing like the fact that we brought in $1.35 million this year and are asking our church membership to voluntarily give $1.35 million again next year.
Yeah.
Like, I also don't want to downplay the sacrifice that is.
Yeah. And not just voluntarily give, that I truly believe this process every year, I love it. And I wouldn't even think I'd love a budget process, but there's just something about it that makes you realize the purpose of tithing and giving to the local church and prioritizing giving to your local church. You see where it's spent, how it's spent, the heart behind why it's spent, the motivation, the long-term goal, the visions. It's just, if nothing else, it's not just like, oh, I'm volunteering this, but like you said earlier, we'd love for people to understand it and then commit to it as a body and saying, we believe in what God's doing here and we want to meet this need. Of course, like in abundance would be great. Meet it and let God do his thing here. And so I love this process because I feel like it does compel you to really consider why we give, why God asks us to be a part of that process. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening, I think I want you to know that it's the full recognition of that. That's why, while some of these sacrifices, whether personal, whether as a church family, are real and have real impacts. One of the reasons, I think ultimately the reason why those sacrifices can be made, and I think can be made with joy, is ultimately because of Christ, because of his sacrifice for us, because of his giving for us. I mean, it's so small in comparison. But it also, in the midst of our community, is because of the sacrifices and the sacrificial giving we know that this budget represents on the part of our entire membership as well. Like, we're not the only ones sacrificing. Like, you're sacrificing, and we know that, and we invite you to sacrifice joyfully, financially, to this end, so that we can meet this budget together, because there's so much joy to be had in that sacrifice together.
Yeah.
And it's, in that sense, it's not about like the money, it's about the gift of giving. It's about the gift of generosity. It's about the ways in which God has geared our hearts and our world for the blessings of sacrificing together for the sake of the gospel and the kingdom and its purposes here in West LA and across the world. And so I think even the sacrifices that each of us are making represented in this budget, I think, are meant to both mirror and reflect and invite you into the similar sacrifices as well, so we can experience and walk in joy and that joyful sacrifice together.
Well put. Can I add a few things?
Sure, please. My sure there sounded.
I guess that's why I'm
sounded,
here.
No,
Sure.
No, please.
Yeah, no, I just a couple things that of course, watch the podcast, listen, pray. But just wanted to highlight again, we do have a finance director, her line item's in there. Her name is Sandy King. She's incredible. She does her work in such efficient and effective ways. And so if you have questions, she just reach out to her via email. She can help you with anything. And then it's particularly because I know we have a lot of new people at this church. And then even for people that maybe kind of have been here for a while, I just would love to reiterate, you absolutely can actually ask questions. I would love for people to, sometimes you hear about people that are really uncomfortable about talking about finances and faith, or this is the first time they've ever been part of a church that is this transparent, and they're like, "What is this?" I just want to be the first to say I think this is maybe my third year being a part of this process, and I just want to urge people to know that the pastors are very approachable, they're very knowledgeable. All of the elders have been through this line by line, all of our staff, but I want you to approach the pastors and feel like you can actually ask questions about this, and to whether understand more about the heart, or to even process if you're having struggling through faith and finances. What does that look like? I haven't felt compelled or joyful to give. There might be people in our midst that are like that. And so if you're new here, I would just tell you that this is a place that you can freely come and approach and ask questions. And so if you need any help, reach out to us.
Such a great reminder. And you know what? It also reminds me, I think this is a great opportunity to, like, if you're if you aren't in the habit of regularly sacrificially giving, this is a great opportunity to have some conversations about that. Not for the sake of the budget, not for the sake of the church, but because of, I mean, we're talking about the joy of how God has created us in generosity to both be givers, to as a church family together, to be generous to our community. This is why we're investing in ways that will bless and reach the community, not just ourselves. Like, have a conversation with your spouse, with your roommates, with your discipleship community leader, with us pastors. We'd love to talk about the principles of why God has called us to, and how God has called us to steward what he gives us, and why generosity to others and to the local church is such an important part of that. And it's something we want to continue to equip you on more, but I want you to have that conversation, not because so we can make our church, but I want you to have that conversation because without an understanding of that and without being engaged in that, there is a richness of walking with God and a joy that that God has designed for you that you're missing out on, and that we want for you. And I think this is, talking about money simply provides an opportunity to be like, to take a step back and to think, wait, where am I? How am I engaged? What's going on, and how does the Lord want to work on my heart?
Yeah,
in that.
That's good.
With that, finally, there's one last kind of piece, and this is a bit of one last piece I want to look at, and that is to give you an update on so you've seen where our finances are generally. You've seen our budget for next year. It's also an important part for us to look at of this process, to give you a annual update on where the legacy fund is. As a reminder, I mentioned it before, but just in case, in the last hour you've forgotten, our legacy fund is what we do with the money that the church receives as bequests. So when someone passes away and they leave money to the church, that money does not go into our regular operating budget. It is not available to be used for any of the things we just talked about. We make this commitment to people before they pass away. And because of that, we cannot just be we're short in the budget, let's use some money from the legacy fund. That's not how this works. Our legacy fund is committed to half of that fund be utilized for leaving the development of this campus that we have inherited. If you are here and you are worshiping here and you're enjoying the parking lot and the sanctuary and the kids, we have inherited this from not just the last generation, but from generations and generations and generations on this plot of land since 1924, in this church family since 1901. We've inherited so much. And so we want to be good stewards of that. And the legacy fund helps us to leave it better than we found it for the next generation, so that the gospel can continue to be proclaimed from this corner of Idaho and Barrington for generations to come. And so the legacy fund, half of it is dedicated to that, and half of it is dedicated to the capital projects and multiplication of the church beyond us. So with our partners across the world, in church planting, and in the development of outreach into the community here beyond us. And so you can see in what we've sent out to you a summary of how the legacy fund has been utilized since 2014 when it was established. It's been about a decade now, and I wish I could go line by line. We don't have time to go line by line through this. I wish I could go maybe we will on another podcast, just line by line, the story of all the different ways God has used these funds across the world, across our city, and here on our campus, ways that we are being blessed by it. But God has used it over the last decade in incredible ways, and we want to continue to use that. We received a bequest this last year that also put more money back into this legacy fund for kind of the next iteration and generation of that. And so you'll see over the last year, since July, beginning of our fiscal year, we received a gift of $1.5 million, which is overwhelming, specifically, again, for the legacy fund, not for our general operations. I know I've said that too many times, but people sometimes confuse it.
Yeah.
And the money has gone out to the Shalom Church Plant as we've committed to them to support them over the first 3 years of their church. You will notice one thing that's missing from this that's been there in previous years is donations to the South Bay Church Plant. And that's because our plan to support them with 3 installments and then see where they are with the hopes that they were financially independent has come to fruition. And the South Bay Church is financially self-sufficient, which is, honestly, let's just call it miraculous over the last, through COVID, to not just survive.
Because some people might not know, well, how long ago did you send out that plan?
No, we planned it. When? Yeah, we sent it out 5 months before, or 4 months before COVID hit. And through COVID, through everything else, that they continue to both be there and grow and are self-sufficient. I mean, it's just incredible gift of the Lord. And so we're on that same trajectory with the Shalom Church Plant and anticipate utilizing funds this coming year, both in a final installment for the Shalom Church Plant, Lord willing, and to for the sake of the investment in the administration building, the offices that were flooded out that have now been redesigned, and we're hoping that'll take place this year, including the installment of an elevator.
Amen.
Amen. An installment of an elevator to make the second floor of our campus accessible, which has been a huge need, and we're hopeful that's all going to take place in the coming year. But you see where things are at there. If you have any questions about that, if you have any questions about the Legacy Fund, please let us know. And if you would like to designate Cornerstone as a beneficiary of your will, of your living trust, we want you to see that these are the kinds of things that the resources that if you pass away someday, leave finances to the church, this is how they're going to be used, and for incredible fruit. And honestly, for things that wouldn't be possible if it weren't for this incredible generosity of people after they've passed away. Church plants that wouldn't have been possible, a multiplication, a community center, and ways that we can leave this facility to the next generation that wouldn't have been possible without this overwhelming generosity. And
what's not shown here, I mean, some people have done it through leaving their house behind for us versus, or sometimes it's just like an investment or something they left behind. And so, without knowing kind of some of those stories, it's just interesting to see what people don't sometimes realize how much it just impacted the kingdom. It's just really beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Well, that's that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steph. I want to thank you not just for walking through this with me and joining the podcast and, adding some context here, but I just want to thank you for your help in the process of making this possible. This has been a journey of getting really creative to make this work. And I'm so thankful for the work that you've put in, the sacrifices you've made, and even just the openness of your heart to creative solutions and to the Lord's leading that wasn't exactly at what we saw 6 months ago.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Yeah. It's a good process, good outcome. I just trust God. It's going to come together.
So I hope that actually over the last hour, if you've been listening to this, that you've experienced just a piece of what we've experienced, which is a really big gulp and a pit in your stomach at the beginning, and some strange excitement at the end, and appreciation for the faithfulness of God, His goodness to us, and an excitement and a passion to be sacrificially engaged and involved in what the Lord is doing here that is just overwhelmingly special. So,
amen. So what's next? Is you're going to present it?
Yep.
Family meeting?
So we're going to, I'm going to send this out and we are going to ask, thank you so much. That's helpful. I'll mention this on a Sunday morning. You will receive all this information in an email. And we will ask you to affirm and commit to this budget as a church family at the family meeting on June 4th. So if you have any questions, any concerns, please let us know ahead of that. We'd love to talk to you about that. And let me say this, we're going to ask you to affirm and commit to it then too. That doesn't mean that can be the end of discussions. Like even after June 4th, We would love to talk with you about it. We'd love to answer any questions. We'd love to give you, if you just want some more context, we'd love to do that as well. Until June 25th, when I'm going on sabbatical, and then you can ask another pastor. But
until then,
there's a window.
Yeah.
No, but that'll be another podcast. That'll be another announcement. But we're thankful for you. We are so thankful for the ways in which you sacrifice for our family, not just for an organization, but the ways you sacrifice for our family, both in your time and your energy and financially. It is such a joy to be a part of this together. So for all those that are listening, we thank you. We love you so much.
Yeah.
And
you can now reset your speed back to 1 because
that's right.
For your listening pleasure. We are done.
That's right. And we'll see you on Sunday.